My dad gave my sister my $387,000 property at Christmas. Then I handed him one document. It was Christmas dinner. 14 people at the table. My father stood up, raised his glass, and announced that he'd arranged for my property. The land my grandfather built from nothing, the land I'd purchased myself 4 years earlier, to go to my sister. She needs it more than you do, he said. I set my napkin down. I reached into my bag. What he didn't know was that I was a paralegal at an estate law firm. That I had read the deed. That I had confirmed the title. That I had sat in my attorney's office 2 weeks earlier and been told plainly, he doesn't own it. The manila envelope had been in my bag since December 22nd. I had checked it twice that morning before I drove over. He raised his glass. The room toasted. I waited. These are stories for anyone who has ever been the overlooked one. The daughter who kept showing up while everyone else got the credit. Revenge stories, Reddit revenge stories, best revenge stories, Reddit stories, family stories, betrayal stories, revenge Reddit, cheating stories, infidelity stories, Reddit. Category: people and blogs. I was drying a dish towel on the oven handle when my father called to tell me he had signed my property over to my sister. It was a Tuesday evening in early December. The kitchen smelled like the pot roast I'd been keeping warm for an hour, and the window above the sink had fogged over from the steam. I remember that detail because I stood at that window for a long time after I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I set the dish towel down on the counter, folded it once, and stood there until the steam on the glass had cleared. Welcome back. I'm Callie, 34 years old, a paralegal at an estate and property law firm in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I've been at that firm for 9 years. I know what a deed transfer means. I know what it requires. And I knew before my father finished his second sentence, exactly what he had and had not done. He had called from the house on Briarcroft Road, the house I had helped him keep 3 years earlier, though he had never mentioned that to anyone. His voice had the particular flatness it got when he had already decided something and was now informing me of it, the way you might inform someone the weather had changed. I talked to your sister, he said. She's been struggling. The kids need stability. That property on Maple Hill, I've made arrangements. I didn't answer right away. It's the right thing, he said. You understand. I told him I heard him. That was all I said. I didn't ask what arrangements. I didn't ask whether he had consulted an attorney. I didn't ask how he thought he had the authority to make arrangements on a property that was not his. I set the phone down on the counter next to the folded dish towel. I turned back to the window. Outside, the oak tree in the backyard had lost all its leaves, and the last of the light was going gray behind it. I stood there until the pot roast had gone cold. Then I went to my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out the folder I had labeled in blue pen 3 years earlier. I confirmed what was in it. I closed the drawer. I went back to the kitchen and ate my dinner cold. My father believed he had given away something that was mine. He had not checked whether it was his to give. That was the first thing he got wrong. It would not be the last. Act 2. Labor plus context plus profession. To understand what my father did, you have to understand where that property came from. And to understand that, you have to understand my grandfather. His name was Earl Maddox. He was born in 1931 in a farmhouse outside of Carthage, Missouri, the youngest of 4 boys and the only one who stayed. His brothers went to St. Louis, to Kansas City, to wherever there was factory work and a wage that came on Fridays. Earl stayed because someone had to. He understood something about land that his brothers had already decided wasn't worth understanding. That it was the one thing that didn't leave you if you took care of it. He worked 40 years as a pipe fitter. In 1964 he bought his first parcel of land, 3 acres outside Hendersonville. With $4,200 in cash he had saved over 6 years without a savings account, folded in an envelope inside a cedar box he kept under his bed. He added to it twice more over the following decade, not with loans but with money he had already saved. By the time I was born he owned a total of 9 acres on Maple Hill Road, none of it mortgaged, all of it paid. He used to say that the bank had never owned a square foot of anything he had and he intended to keep it that way. I was the one who listened to him say it. I was 7 years old the first time he took me out to walk the fence line on Maple Hill Road. He pointed at the corner post and said, "Callie, that post was here before your father was born, and if you do right by it, it'll be here after all of us are gone." I remember the way he said it. Not like a lesson but like a fact. He wasn't trying to inspire me. He was telling me something true. My sister Shelby was 13 by then and had no interest in fence lines or corner posts. She was at the age where anything rural felt like a punishment. She didn't come to those walks. That was her right. I don't say it to criticize her. I say it because it mattered later. When Earl died in 2006, I was 15. He left the 9 acres on Maple Hill Road to my father in trust, with a handwritten addendum tucked inside the official documents that my father never mentioned to anyone. I didn't know about the addendum until I was 22. More on that in a moment. What I knew at 15 was that my grandfather was gone and that I was going to have to figure out the rest of my life on my own, because the rest of my family had already quietly decided they were not going to help me do it. I am not saying that as an accusation. I'm saying it as context. My father managed a hardware supply warehouse. My mother worked part-time at a school office. When I graduated high school in 2008, there was no money set aside for college. There had been money for Shelby 2 years earlier. Not a lot, but my parents had written a check for $11,400 toward her first year at a community college in Nashville. They told me it came from a workplace injury settlement. I did not ask where the rest of that money went. I knew I was not going to see it. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I got a partial academic scholarship from the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, $3,200 per year, and I filled the rest with work. I waitressed 4 nights a week at a diner off Main Street in Hendersonville through my entire undergraduate degree. I cleaned offices on Saturday mornings for a property management company. At peak, I was working 28 hours a week on top of a full course load. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in legal studies, $6,700 in student loan debt, and no one from my family in the audience. My father had a warehouse inventory count that weekend. My mother drove Shelby to a consignment sale in Franklin. I don't tell you this so you will feel sorry for me. I tell you because the sequence matters. What I built alone. The family was not present for the building. They showed up later for the property. I started at Bradshaw and Alcott, the estate and property law firm, at 23 as a file clerk. Within 2 years I was a paralegal. Within 5 I was lead paralegal on all property title work. I have spent the last 9 years reading deeds, chains of title, closing statements, trust documents and transfer on death designations. I know what they say. I know what they mean. I know when something has been filed correctly and when someone has assumed it was filed correctly without actually checking. That distinction would matter. In 2018, 3 years before my father called me from Briarcroft Road, I had discovered the handwritten addendum my grandfather tucked into the trust documents in 2006. I found it because my father had finally gotten around to having the Maple Hill property formally surveyed for insurance purposes, and he handed me the original estate file to pull the property description. The addendum was behind the last page, folded twice, written in Earl's handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. It said in plain language that it was his wish that the Maple Hill Road property pass to me, Callie Maddox, upon my father's death or upon my father's decision to transfer the property outside the immediate family, whichever came first. It named me by name. It referenced the parcel number. It was witnessed by 2 people whose names I recognized, Earl's neighbor Bill Tatum and his wife Ruth, both of whom had since died. The addendum was not legally binding as written. My grandfather was not an attorney. He didn't know what he didn't know about how to make that language enforceable. But it told me something important about what Earl had intended, and it put something in my mind that hadn't been there before. I called my own attorney that same week. Her name is Margaret Cook. She had handled my lease on my apartment the year before and I trusted her. I laid the situation out for her. She told me the addendum alone wouldn't get me far in a courtroom, but that if I was serious about protecting my interest in the property, there was a cleaner way to do it. I could purchase the property myself from my father before anything happened to complicate the title. I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I called my father. I told him I wanted to buy the Maple Hill parcel. I told him I had the money or could get it. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Why would you want that old piece of land?" I told him Earl would have wanted it to stay in the family. He said, which was the closest my father got to agreement. We agreed on a price of $387,000, which was below market value by roughly $40,000. My father said that was fair since I was family. I did not point out the irony of that statement. I was not flush with money at 31. But I had been careful. I had $48,000 saved, every dollar from working, nothing inherited. I secured a mortgage on the remaining balance through First Tennessee. The closing was on March 14, 2018. I signed in Margaret Cook's office on a Thursday afternoon with a notary present. I drove to the Maple Hill parcel afterward and stood at the fence line by the corner post my grandfather had pointed out to me when I was 7. The post was still there. I paid that mortgage myself for 3 years. Not one person in my family knew I owned the property. My father thought he had sold it to me informally, a handshake deal he could revisit if circumstances changed. He had not read the closing statement carefully enough to understand that the title had formally transferred to me at closing. He believed for 3 years that the arrangement was still negotiable. That was the second thing he got wrong. During those 3 years, I also quietly covered $23,400 in repairs to the roof and plumbing on my parents' house on Briarcroft Road. I did it because the house needed it and my father could not afford it without going into debt he couldn't manage. I paid the contractors directly. I told my parents it had been handled through a home warranty claim. It had not. I did not tell them because I did not want the favor used as a bargaining chip later. I had learned enough about how leverage worked in my family to know that a favor disclosed was a favor that would eventually be collected. Shelby, in the same 3 years, received a $14,000 car from my parents when her old one gave out. She received use of the Briarcroft house for 6 months when her marriage ended. She received what I later calculated as approximately $31,000 in various forms of direct family support. She was not asked to repay any of it. Nobody tracked it. It simply happened the way water finds its level. I am not bitter about it. I am saying it because you need to know what the family considered normal, in order to understand what my father said to me on the phone in December. The deed copy was in my filing cabinet. Highlighted in yellow, the way I highlighted every document that mattered. The parcel number. The date. My name on the title line. I had introduced Margaret Cook to the file again in the fall, just as a precaution, because I had started to notice that my father was spending more time talking to Shelby and less time talking to me. I had learned to read the weather in my family the same way Earl had learned to read the weather in Missouri, not with panic but with preparation. The folder was ready. It had been ready for 3 years. That was the history. This is what happened 3 days before Christmas. My father called on a Tuesday evening. 4 days later, on Saturday the 18th of December, I received a text from my sister Shelby. It read, "Dad told me about the arrangement. I just wanted you to know I didn't ask for this. It just kinda happened. I hope you're okay." I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. I didn't answer right away. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood at the counter while it brewed. The text was doing something specific. It was positioning Shelby as the innocent party, as someone things happened to rather than someone who made choices. I had seen that framing before. It was the framing my family used when they wanted something to be true without having to say they wanted it. The next morning I called my father and asked him a direct question. Had he contacted a real estate attorney about the transfer? He said he had talked to a guy, someone a friend of his knew who had helped him with a contract dispute at the warehouse a few years back. I asked if that attorney had pulled the current title on the Maple Hill parcel. My father paused. Why would he need to do that? I told him I was just checking. Kept my voice level. I said I would talk to him after Christmas and we could sort everything out then. He said, "There's nothing to sort out, Callie. It's done." I didn't argue. I let that sit on the line between us for a moment. Then I said I hoped he had a good weekend and I ended the call. I already knew what the title said. I had pulled it myself the morning after his first call, through the county recorder's office online portal. My name was on it. It had been on it since March 14, 2018. Whatever his warehouse attorney had reviewed, it was not the current chain of title on that parcel. My father had arranged to give away something he did not own. That afternoon I drove to Margaret Cook's office. If you've ever known exactly what the document says and had to wait for someone else to catch up, you know what that drive felt like. Margaret Cook's office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian on Main Street, above a bookshop that always had the front door open regardless of weather. Her waiting room had 2 chairs and a side table with a lamp that she had clearly brought from home, because it had a faded fabric shade that did not match anything else in the room. I had been in that waiting room 4 times over the years. It felt each time like the kind of place where things got resolved. Margaret herself was in her late 50s, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a manner that was precise without being cold. She did not waste words. When I told her what my father had told me on the phone, she pulled my file before I finished the second sentence. She spread the closing statement on her desk and tapped the title line with one finger. "He doesn't own it," she said. "I know," I said. "Whoever he consulted didn't pull the title." "I know that too." She looked up at me. "Do you want me to send a letter now, or do you want to wait until after Christmas?" I thought about it for less than 30 seconds. "After Christmas," I said. "I want to do this in person." Margaret nodded. She pulled out a second document, the deed copy highlighted in yellow, the duplicate she had in her own file, and slid it across the desk. "Take this with you," she said. "Don't leave it in your car." I didn't. I put it in a manila envelope, sealed it, and put it in the inside pocket of my bag next to my keys. Over the next 4 days I did 3 things. First, I called the Sumner County Clerk's office and confirmed that no transfer, quitclaim, or any other instrument affecting the Maple Hill parcel had been recorded since my 2018 closing. The woman I spoke to was helpful and matter-of-fact. Nothing had been filed. The title was clean. Second, I drove out to the Maple Hill parcel on a Wednesday afternoon. It was cold, 38 degrees and overcast, and the grass along the fence line had gone brown and flat from the first hard frost. I parked on the gravel turnout and walked the fence line the same way Earl had walked it with me when I was 7. The corner post was still there. I put my hand on it for a moment, then walked back to my car. Third, I answered every one of my father's texts and emails in the days that followed with calm, brief, unremarkable replies. He sent 3. One asked whether I was coming to Christmas dinner. One said he hoped I wasn't going to make things difficult. One said again that it was done and that Shelby needed stability. If you've ever been the one in your family who built something alone and watched someone else treat it as theirs to arrange, you know what those texts felt like to read. And you know what it took to write back each time something that said nothing and meant everything. I kept my phone charged. I kept my folder in my bag. I kept my face still at work and my voice even on calls. At Bradshaw and Alcott, I processed 2 other estate file closings that week. Nobody in my office knew what was sitting in my bag while I did it. If you've ever had to hold something close while the people around you moved through their ordinary days, this part is yours too. My father's Christmas dinner was scheduled for December 23rd. It was always on the 23rd because my mother's sister drove in from Knoxville and left on the 24th. 14 people were expected. My parents, Shelby and her 2 kids, my mother's sister Carol and her husband, for cousins, a neighbor couple my parents had been close to for 20 years, and me. The night before, the evening of December 22nd, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of tea, going through the folder one more time when my phone rang. It was Carol, my mother's sister. I had always gotten along with Carol in the way you get along with someone who pays attention. She noticed things and she remembered them, and she never used what she noticed to get something from you. "I heard what your father is planning," she said without preamble. I told her I knew. "I want you to know something," she said. "Your grandfather talked to me once about the Maple Hill property. He said, and I remember this exactly because it was the last time I saw him before he got sick, he said, Callie is the one who understands what it means to keep something. The others know how to want things. She knows how to take care of them." I didn't answer right away. I kept my hand flat on the table. "I'm not telling you what to do," Carol said. "I'm just telling you what Earl said. I thought you should hear it before tomorrow." I told her I was glad she called. I told her I was going to be all right. He said she knew. She said she'd see me tomorrow. She said, "Whatever you decide to bring into that room with you, I'll be there." I set the phone down. I sat at the table for a long time. The folder was in front of me. The manila envelope was next to it. I had already made my decision. I had made it on the night my father called in December, standing at the foggy kitchen window. But there is a difference between deciding something and being settled in it. Carol had given me the thing I hadn't realized I was still waiting for. Not permission, not advice. Just confirmation that someone who had known Earl had heard what he said and remembered it, and that the thing I was about to walk into the next day was not a fight I had invented. It was one I had been asked to finish. I put the folder back in my bag. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and I slept without difficulty, because there is a particular kind of rest that comes when you have done everything you can do with the time you had, and tomorrow is simply the day you walk in. The morning of December 23rd, I woke at 6. I didn't set an alarm. I didn't need one. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the heat come on in the house, and then I got up and made coffee. I dressed deliberately. I put on the dark green wool blazer I wore to depositions. Not the one I wore to family events, not a holiday sweater, not anything that said I was there to belong to the occasion. The blazer was what I wore when I was at work. When I needed to remember that I was competent and that the document in my bag was the only thing that needed to speak. I buttoned it in front of the mirror and did not spend long looking. The folder was on the kitchen table where I had left it the night before. I checked it once. Deed copy on top, highlighted in yellow with the title line and the parcel number visible through the first fold. Closing statement behind it, dated March 14, 2018. Margaret Cook's business card clipped to the inside cover. I refolded it, slid it back into the manila envelope and put the envelope in the inside pocket of my bag. I checked the bag once. Then I checked it again. Then I stopped. I drove the 22 minutes to my parents' house on Briarcroft Road. The radio was on and I did not hear a word of it. The roads were dry and cold. I passed the hardware supply warehouse where my father had worked for 30 years. Its parking lot half full on a Thursday morning before Christmas. I passed the diner where I had waitressed through college. New ownership now, different sign, same building. I had not thought about that diner in years. When I pulled onto Briarcroft Road, I could see the cars already. Aunt Carol's sedan. My cousin Marcus's truck. The neighbor couple, the Pattersons, had parked on the grass the way they always did because my father had never put in enough gravel. It was 12 degrees and the yard was silver with frost. I sat in my car for 1 minute. Not because I was uncertain. Because I wanted to arrive ready, and arriving ready meant arriving still. Then I picked up my bag, got out and went inside. The house was warm and loud with the particular noise of family, overlapping voices, a football game muted on the television in the corner. My mother's sister Carol moving between the kitchen and the dining room with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this her whole adult life. The table in the dining room was set for 14. The centerpiece was a pine branch arrangement my mother made every year, the same one she had been making since I was a child, with 3 red candles in it, 2 of which were already lit. My father was at the head of the table. He was in his good shirt, the blue one he wore to church and to anything he considered important. He was already standing, moving around the table, talking to my cousin Marcus and touching the back of chairs the way he did when he was organizing a room in his head. When he saw me come in, he nodded. He did not smile. He did not come to me. Shelby was in the kitchen. She came out when she heard my voice and she hugged me, quickly and with the particular quality of someone who was doing a thing because it was required. She smelled like the casserole she'd been working on. She said, "I'm glad you came." I said I was glad to be there. I went to the kitchen and helped my mother for 20 minutes. I sliced bread. I stirred the gravy. I did everything that was asked of me and nothing that wasn't. When everyone sat down, I took the chair I always took, third from my father's left, across from Carol, next to Marcus. My bag was on the floor beside my chair. I could feel the weight of it. I looked at my father. He was surveying the table with the expression of a man who had decided something important was about to happen and was satisfied with that. His hands were on the back of his chair. His shoulders were back. I understood exactly what kind of performance was about to begin. I had seen it before in other rooms on behalf of other people. A person who believes they hold all the cards does not hide it well. They stand a certain way. They wait for the moment. I was willing to let him have his moment. I had learned, in 9 years of property law, that the person who lets the other side speak first almost always wins. Act 4. The confrontation. My father tapped his knife against his water glass. The table quieted. It happened the way it always happened. The conversations dropped off one at a time, and then the room was still except for the sound of the candles and the distant muted football game. "Before we eat," my father said, "I want to say something." He looked around the table. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was pleased with himself. Not loud but placed, the way someone places a gift on a table and steps back to let you notice it. "This family has been through a hard year. Your mother and I have done a lot of thinking about what matters. About what lasts." He paused. He looked at Shelby. "Your sister has been struggling. She's got 2 kids and a future to build, and family is supposed to help with that." He picked up his water glass. "So I've arranged for the Maple Hill property to go to Shelby. It's what your grandfather would have wanted. It's what's right for this family. He raised his glass. At least 4 people at the table raised theirs in response. Marcus looked at his water glass, then at me, and did not raise it. Carol kept her hands flat on the table. The Pattersons raised their glasses because they did not know what else to do. My father drank. I waited. I let the silence that followed his words stretch out completely. Let every person at that table turn it over. Let the weight of it settle. Let my father set his glass down and feel the room beginning to absorb what he'd said as though it were already finished. Then I set my napkin on the table. I pushed my chair back. I stood up. Every head at the table turned. I did not raise my voice. I kept my hands at my sides and my shoulders level. I looked at my father. "Dad," I said, "you can't give away something that isn't yours to give." He blinked. "Callie, you said she needs it more than I do." Kept my voice even. Flat. The way I kept it in depositions when the other side said something incorrect and I needed them to hear the correction clearly. "You were right that she needs it. But what you arranged wasn't yours to arrange. That property has been in this family since your grandfather." "Since my grandfather left it to you," I said. "And you sold it to me in March of 2018. You signed the closing statement. Margaret Cook notarized it. The Sumner County Recorder filed it." The room was very quiet. My father's expression shifted. Not immediately. There was a half-second where he was still the man at the head of the table who had just made an announcement. Then something moved behind his eyes. "That was an informal arrangement," he said. "We talked about." "There's nothing informal about a deed transfer," I said. I reached into my bag. I took out the manila envelope. I set it on the table in front of me. I opened the clasp slowly, one fold at a time, not looking at my father's face, not looking at anyone. I took out the deed copy and unfolded it, one page then the second, until it was open and flat and facing up. I laid it flat on the table and slid it toward my father. The paper made a small sound on the tablecloth. The yellow highlighting was visible from 6 feet away. The title line, the parcel number, and my name on the line that read grantee. "Page 1, I said. "Title line. My name. Parcel number 047-215-3A. Dated March 14, 2018. I reached in again and took out the closing statement and laid it flat beside the deed. "Page 2, I said. "Closing statement. Same date. Your signature on line 11. Mine on line 12. Notarized." I set the envelope down and put my hands flat on the table. Nobody spoke. My father's hands, which had been on the arms of his chair, went still. He was looking at the papers. His face had gone a particular kind of gray. Not pale, not flushed, but the specific color that comes when a person has been certain of something for a very long time and has just understood they were wrong. His jaw tightened. His right hand moved toward the papers and then stopped. "This isn't," he started. "It's the recorded deed," I said. "You can call the county clerk's office on the 26th and confirm the filing." Shelby said, "Dad?" Her voice was small. She was looking at him, not at me, the way she always had, waiting for him to reframe something, to find the angle that made it workable. He didn't speak. At the end of the table, the Pattersons had set their glasses down. Marcus had his forearms on the table and was looking at the deed copy from where he sat. Carol had not moved. Her face was still, and she was watching my father the way you watch someone when you already know what they're going to do. "I don't understand," my mother said from her seat beside my father. Her voice was careful. "Travis, what does this mean?" My father said nothing. His hand went to his water glass. His knuckles went white on it. Then he set the glass down. "It means," I said quietly, "that the property was transferred to me at closing 4 years ago. It's been mine since then. There was nothing left to arrange." Shelby's chair moved backward slightly, not from standing, just from the shift of her weight, the small involuntary movement of a person recalibrating. Her face had gone very still. "You knew," she said. "This whole time." "Since March of 2018, I said. "Yes." "And you didn't say anything." "There wasn't anything to say," I said. "Until there was." My father finally looked up from the deed. His face was still that gray. His eyes were wet, not from crying but from the particular physical response of a person whose blood pressure has changed abruptly. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he said, and his voice had gone low and unsteady in a way I had never heard from him before. "Why did you let me?" "Let you what, Dad?" Kept my voice level. You called me to inform me. You didn't ask me. You told me it was done. You said there was nothing to sort out. He didn't answer. You were right about one thing, I said. It is done. It was done in March of 2018. I picked up the deed copy. I picked up the closing statement. I folded them carefully and put them back in the envelope, and I put the envelope back in my bag. I sat down. The room was the quietest I had ever heard that house. My father sat at the head of the table with his hands in his lap and said nothing. Shelby was looking at the centerpiece. The 2 candles were still burning. My mother reached over and touched my father's arm, and he didn't move. Marcus said quietly, "Should we eat?" Nobody laughed. But he had broken the silence, and my mother stood up and began to move things to the table, because that was what she did when she didn't know what else to do, and slowly the room began to breathe again. Carol caught my eye from across the table. She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up the bread basket and passed it to the person beside her. My father did not eat. He sat at the head of the table for the first 20 minutes of the meal, and then he excused himself and went to the back room, and he did not come back to the table. I ate my dinner. I answered when people spoke to me. I helped clear the plates afterward, and I washed 2 serving dishes at the sink while my mother put away the leftovers. She didn't say anything to me at the sink. She handed me a dish and I dried it the way we had done 1,000 times in that kitchen. She handed me another one. Before I left, I went to find Shelby. She was in the hallway putting on her coat. She looked at me, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something sharp. But she didn't. She said, "I didn't know, Callie. About the deed. I want you to know that." I told her I believed her. I picked up my bag. I walked out the front door into the cold December air. Life, closing. My father had said, "She needs it more than you do." He meant it as a verdict. He said it the way you say something that ends a conversation, from a height, with the confidence of someone who has already decided you won't push back. He was wrong about the property. He was also wrong about me. I have thought a lot in the months since that Christmas dinner about what it cost my grandfather to save $4,200 over 6 years without a bank account, to fold it into an envelope, to walk into a transaction with nothing but the cash and the knowledge that once the deed was signed, it was his. No one could renegotiate it. No one could decide later that circumstances had changed. Earl knew something my father never quite learned. A document properly executed is not a conversation. It does not care how you felt. It does not adjust for what you assumed. It says what it says, and it stays said. I thought about him when I laid that deed on the table. I thought about the corner post still standing after 30 years. I thought about what it means to take care of something, not to want it, not to announce it, but to do the quiet, unremarkable work of keeping it year after year, when no one is watching and no one is thanking you for it. That is what Earl had seen in me when I was 7 years old walking a fence line. Carol remembered it. I had not forgotten it. My father called 3 weeks later. He did not apologize exactly, he is not a man who does that cleanly. But he said he understood now what had happened in 2018, and that he should have checked before making the arrangements he made. It was as close as I was ever going to get, and I accepted it as what it was. Shelby and I have spoken twice since December. It is careful on both sides. That may be how it stays for a while. I'm not bitter about it. The Maple Hill property is mine. The mortgage is paid in full. The corner post is still there. If you've ever been the person in your family who kept something, who showed up quietly year after year while other people announced and arranged and decided, this story is yours. You know what it costs to hold something without flinching. You know what it means when the room finally goes still. The people who price you cheap are only ever telling you what they're worth, not what you are. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge, where every story belongs to the one who built it.